You wake up and the first thought that crashes into your consciousness isn't gratitude or excitement or even neutral emptiness. It's exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep can fix, but something deeper. Something that sits in your bones like lead. You've achieved things. You've succeeded by every conventional measure. You have relationships, responsibilities, accomplishments that should make you feel alive. But instead, there's this growing sense of heaviness, like you're carrying the weight of seeing too much, understanding too deeply, feeling everything at an intensity that other people seem mercifully spared from experiencing. You sit in conversations where people are animated about things that feel profoundly trivial to you. Office politics, celebrity gossip, the newest trend, who said what on social media, and you try to participate. You really do, because you don't want to be that person who can't just relax and enjoy simple pleasures. But inside, there's this screaming fatigue, this bone-deep weariness that comes from pretending that shallow things matter when you can see layers of complexity and suffering and meaning that others seem completely blind to. You smile and nod while feeling like you're slowly suffocating under the weight of depths that you can't share, because the moment you try, people look at you like you're being dramatic, overthinking, too intense, too much. And here's what makes it unbearable. You can't turn it off. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you've learned about human nature, about suffering, about the mechanisms of meaning and meaninglessness. Other people have the mercy of distraction, the blessing of superficiality, the gift of being able to lose themselves in entertainment and small talk and comfortable illusions. But you don't. Every interaction, every experience, every moment carries this freight of awareness that exhausts you before the day has even begun. You're tired not because you've done too much, but because you've understood too much. And that understanding is a burden you carry alone. You're not losing your mind, and you're not being dramatic. Thousands of people right now are experiencing exactly this same profound fatigue. This exhaustion that comes not from weakness, but from depth. This weariness has been observed, studied, and understood by someone who lived it more intensely than perhaps any philosopher in history. Friedrich Nietzsche spent his entire life examining why people of depth, people of profound sensitivity and understanding, experience a unique form of life exhaustion that shallow people will never comprehend. What almost no one knows is that Nietzsche identified the precise mechanism that causes this fatigue. And it's not what psychology or self-help or even most philosophies suggest. He discovered that profound people get tired of life not because they're depressed or pessimistic, but because they're carrying a specific type of knowledge that creates an unbearable tension between what they see and what they must pretend not to see. And he found something even more devastating. Most profound people never discover the one transformation that would convert their exhaustion into a source of tremendous power. Today, I'm going to reveal exactly what Nietzsche understood about the fatigue of depth, why it affects certain people with such crushing intensity, and most importantly, the path he discovered that separates those who are destroyed by their profundity from those who are forged into something beyond ordinary human limitation. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your exhaustion might be the most important signal you've ever received. But I need to warn you, what I'm about to share doesn't offer comfort. It demands everything. Nietzsche's most disturbing insight wasn't about the death of God or the will to power. It was his observation that profound people experience what he called the weight of existence with an intensity that most humans are constitutionally protected from feeling. He noticed that certain individuals, through some combination of sensitivity, intelligence, and tragic life experience, develop the capacity to see through the comforting illusions that make ordinary life bearable. And this seeing, this inability to remain unconscious, creates a fatigue so profound that life itself begins to feel like an unbearable burden. Consider what happens when you develop real depth of understanding. You begin to see that most of what people call happiness is actually just successful distraction from the void. You recognize that the majority of human activity is elaborate theater designed to avoid confronting the fundamental questions of meaning and mortality. You watch people construct their entire identities around jobs, relationships, achievements, beliefs, and you can see with painful clarity that these are just scaffolding. Temporary structures built to create the illusion of solid ground where there is actually only groundlessness. This isn't pessimism. This isn't depression. This is what Nietzsche called intellectual honesty, the refusal to accept comfortable lies even when those lies would make existence easier. In The Gay Science, he wrote about how the person who has awakened to real questions cannot return to the sleep of conventional answers. They've eaten from the tree of knowledge, and paradise is forever closed to them. But here's what makes this observation so cutting. Society doesn't reward this honesty. It punishes it. The person who sees too clearly, who feels too deeply, who questions too persistently, they become exhausting to be around. People sense that your presence is somehow accusatory, that your depth illuminates their shallowness in ways that make them uncomfortable. You've experienced this countless times. You try to have real conversations about meaningful things, about the nature of suffering, about the construction of identity, about the mechanisms of meaning, and people either glaze over, change the subject, or worse. They try to fix you, to convince you to stop thinking so much, to just relax and enjoy life. What they don't understand is that you can't stop. The profound person doesn't choose their depth, it chooses them. And once you've seen beneath the surface of things, once you've understood the elaborate game that most people call reality, you can't voluntarily return to unconsciousness. But here's where Nietzsche's observation becomes truly devastating. He noticed that profound people don't just experience the world differently, they experience time differently. Every moment for the profound person carries accumulated weight from all previous moments of seeing and understanding. When you sit in a meeting at work discussing quarterly targets, you're not just bored, you're carrying the weight of knowing that these targets are arbitrary, that the company itself is a temporary fiction, that everyone in the room will be dead in less than a century, and that the elaborate performance of importance is just collective agreement to pretend that any of this matters in any ultimate sense. This weight, this accumulated seeing, is why shallow activities don't just bore you, they exhaust you. Now understand what this means for your relationships, your work, your entire life. You're not just going through experiences like other people, you're going through experiences while simultaneously being aware of layers of context and meaning that others are mercifully unconscious of. You're watching the movie while also seeing the cables and cameras and scripts and actors. And everyone keeps insisting that you just lose yourself in the story. But you can't, and the effort of pretending you can, of performing normalcy while carrying this weight of awareness, is what's creating your profound fatigue. Nietzsche identified 3 distinct types of profound people based on how they respond to this weight. Understanding which type you are will determine whether your depth destroys you or transforms you into something remarkable. Type 1 is what Nietzsche called the pessimist. The pessimist has seen through the illusions of meaning, has recognized a void at the center of existence, and has concluded that life is fundamentally not worth living. They're not wrong in their observations. Everything they see is accurate. The problem is, they've stopped at the observation. They've mistaken seeing through comforting lies for wisdom when actually it's just the first step. Pessimist believes that because most of life is suffering and meaninglessness, therefore the appropriate response is withdrawal, resignation, a kind of spiritual suicide where you go through the motions while internally checking out. Schopenhauer Nietzsche's early influence represented this position perfectly. Life is suffering. Desire is endless. Satisfaction is impossible. Therefore, the wise person minimizes desire and waits for death. You see pessimists everywhere once you know what to look for. They're the intellectuals who've read everything, understood everything, and concluded that understanding proves life isn't worth the effort. They have sophisticated arguments for their exhaustion. They can cite philosophy, psychology, history, all proving that human existence is basically a cruel joke. And here's what makes them dangerous. They're often the most articulate people in any conversation about meaning. They sound wise. They appear to have seen through to some final truth. But Nietzsche understood that pessimism isn't the end point of profound thinking. It's a failure of imagination, a failure of will, a stopping point that mistakes seeing the problem for solving it. Type 2 is what Nietzsche called the priest or the moralist. This person has also seen through conventional meaning, has recognized the void, but instead of resigning to it, they try to fill it with rigid moral systems, with spiritual dogma, with elaborate rules about how life should be lived. They're exhausted, not from lack of meaning, but from the impossible burden of trying to impose meaning through will and discipline alone. The priest type believes that if they can just be good enough, disciplined enough, devoted enough to their chosen system, they can overcome the void through pure moral effort. You recognize this type immediately. They're the person who's tried every self-improvement system, every spiritual practice, every philosophical framework, always with the same intensity, the same desperate need for it to work, to finally provide the solid ground they're seeking. They meditate for hours but feel no peace. They follow strict moral codes but find no satisfaction. They achieve every goal they set, but the emptiness remains The priest type is exhausted because they're trying to solve an existential problem with moral effort, and it doesn't work. Nietzsche saw that this type often becomes bitter and judgmental, projecting their failure onto others, insisting that if everyone just followed the right rules, lived the right way, believed the right things, then the exhaustion would end. But it never does. Type 3 is what Nietzsche called the free spirit, or the creator. This person has seen through the illusions, has confronted the void, and has made a fundamentally different choice. Instead of resigning to meaninglessness or trying to escape it through imposed meaning, they've accepted that meaning is not found but created. They've understood that their profound fatigue comes not from seeing too much but from refusing to act on what they see. The free spirit realizes that depth of understanding is worthless, even destructive, unless it's converted into depth of creation. They transform their exhaustion into fuel for building something new, something authentic, something that couldn't exist without their specific vision and suffering. But here's what's crucial. The free spirit doesn't overcome exhaustion. They transform their relationship to it. They stop seeing their profound fatigue as a problem to be solved and start recognizing it as information, as evidence that they're attempting to live a life that's misaligned with their actual nature. The creator type understands that they're not tired of life itself. They're tired of living according to values, meanings, and purposes that were designed for people who don't see what they see. And the moment they begin creating their own values, living according to their own internal authority, the nature of their fatigue changes completely. If you're experiencing this profound life exhaustion, if you recognize yourself as someone who sees and feels and understands at depths that others don't, you need to understand the specific dangers that will trap you in permanent weariness. These aren't external obstacles. They're sophisticated psychological mechanisms that your own mind will use to avoid the terrifying responsibility of creation. Danger 1. The seduction of recognition. You're tired, you're exhausted from depth, and then you meet someone, read something. Watch something that finally articulates what you've been feeling. Finally, someone understands. Finally, you're not alone. And in that moment of recognition, something subtle happens. You begin to identify with your exhaustion. You begin to collect your suffering like evidence, building an identity around being the person who sees too much, who feels too deeply, who's too profound for this shallow world. This is a trap. Nietzsche understood that the moment you make your suffering into your identity, you've invested in remaining exhausted. Because if you transform, if you move beyond the fatigue, who are you then? The recognition you're seeking isn't to be found in other exhausted, profound people validating your weariness. It's to be found in finally creating something that expresses your depth instead of just carrying it. Danger 2, the belief that understanding is enough. You've read the philosophy, you understand the mechanisms, you can articulate exactly why you're tired and exactly what the problem is. And part of you believes that this understanding should be enough, that insight equals transformation. But Nietzsche demolished this illusion repeatedly. Understanding without action is just sophisticated paralysis. You can know everything about why profound people get exhausted and still remain exhausted your entire life. Knowledge doesn't transform you. Creation transforms you. But creation requires risk. Requires putting something of yourself into the world where it can be judged and rejected and misunderstood. Understanding is safe. Creation is dangerous. And as long as you can convince yourself that more understanding is needed, you can avoid the actual work of transformation. Danger 3. The fantasy of finding your people. You tell yourself that your exhaustion comes from being surrounded by shallow people, and if you could just find other profound people, true kindred spirits who see what you see, then the fatigue would lift. This is partially true and totally misleading. Yes, connection with people of similar depth matters, but Nietzsche observes something crucial. Profound people are often terrible at being with other profound people, because two people carrying the weight of existence don't lighten each other's load. They often amplify it. You end up in these intense relationships or friendships where you're both seeing too much, both exhausted, both looking to the other for some kind of salvation that neither can provide. The people you need aren't other exhausted, profound people. The people you need are other creating profound people. People who've transformed their depth into power. But you won't find them by searching, you'll find them by becoming them. Danger 4. The hidden comfort of exhaustion. This is the most difficult danger to see and acknowledge. Part of you is attached to your fatigue, because as long as you're exhausted from depth, you have an excuse. You don't have to risk creating something significant because you're too tired. You don't have to put yourself out there because you're too sensitive. You don't have to engage fully with life because you see too much. Your exhaustion becomes a kind of shield protecting you from the vulnerability of authentic creation. Nietzsche was merciless about this. He understood that many profound people secretly prefer their suffering to the responsibility that would come with overcoming it. Because suffering, as painful as it is at least familiar. Power is terrifying. So how does the profound person transform exhaustion into creative power? How do you move from the pessimist or priest type into the free spirit type? Nietzsche was clear that this isn't a gentle evil. It requires what he called self-overcoming, which means you must be willing to destroy your current relationship to your own depth in order to build something new. The first phase is radical acceptance of your nature. You must stop fighting against your profundity. Stop wishing you could be like other people who seem happy with simple pleasures. This doesn't mean celebrating your exhaustion. It means acknowledging without judgment that you are someone who sees and feels at greater intensity than most people, and that this trait is not going away. You can't meditate it away, can't positive think it away, can't drug it away, can't distract it away. This is your nature. The question isn't how to become less profound. The question is what you're going to do with the profundity you have. Most people spend decades fighting their own nature, trying to become someone they're not. And this fight is what creates the unbearable exhaustion. The moment you accept that you're simply built differently, that your depth is not a flaw but a feature, something shifts. The second phase is identifying what Nietzsche called your will to power, which isn't about dominating others, but about discovering your authentic creative drive. What would you create if you weren't exhausted? What would you build, make, express, contribute if you had the energy? Don't answer with what sounds impressive or meaningful or important. Answer with what's actually true for you. The profound person often has creative drives that seem strange or impractical or unmarketable precisely because they come from such specific depth of vision. You might want to create art that will never be popular. You might want to pursue knowledge that has no practical application. You might want to build something that only 3 other people in the world will truly appreciate. This is exactly right. Your exhaustion comes from trying to channel your profound nature into conventional channels. The moment you identify what you actually want to create, not what you should want to create, energy begins to return. The third phase is the commitment to creation despite exhaustion. This is where most profound people fail. They wait for the energy to return before they start creating. They think the sequence is heal exhaustion, then create. But Nietzsche understood the sequence is reversed. Commit to creation and exhaustion transforms. You don't wait until you feel better to start. You start, and starting changes how you feel. This requires beginning in small ways. If you want to write but you're exhausted, you write 1 sentence. If you want to create art but you have no energy, you make 1 mark. If you want to build something but you're overwhelmed, you take 1 action. The profound person is often paralyzed by the gap between the vision in their head and what they can actually accomplish in their exhausted state. But Nietzsche's insight is that you don't need to close the gap. You need to start moving, and the movement itself creates the energy you need. The fourth phase is embracing what Nietzsche called the eternal return as it applies to your creative work. He asks, if you had to create this exact thing, pour yourself into this exact project, experience this exact struggle over and over again for eternity, would you say yes? This is the test of authentic creation. When you're creating from true will to power, from your actual nature, the answer becomes yes. Not because the process is easy or pleasant, but because it's yours. It's what you're here to do. The profound person who creates from authentic drive doesn't lose their exhaustion entirely. They experience a different kind of tiredness, the satisfying fatigue that comes from having used themselves fully, from having expressed what only they could express. This tiredness is completely different from the draining exhaustion of unexpressed depth. The fifth phase is developing what Nietzsche called amor fati, love of fate, in relation to your specific nature. You stop resenting that you're not like other people. You stop wishing you could experience simple happiness. You accept that your path includes greater suffering and greater potential for meaning than most people will ever access. And you choose it, not because it's better or worse, but because it's yours. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's the recognition that your profound nature, with all its exhaustion and difficulty, is also your greatest gift. Without your depth, you couldn't create what you're capable of creating. Without your sensitivity, you couldn't see what you're capable of seeing. The price of depth is exhaustion. The gift of depth is the capacity for authentic creation that shallow people will never possess. Remember that weight you wake up with every morning, that bone-deep fatigue that comes from seeing and understanding too much. It's not a curse and it's not a flaw. It's accumulated creative potential that has nowhere to go. Every profound thought you've had, every deep feeling you've experienced, every layer of reality you've perceived that others miss, it's all energy waiting to be expressed. But as long as that energy remains unexpressed, as long as you carry your depth without creating from it, it becomes weight. It becomes exhaustion. It becomes the unbearable burden of being a profound person in a shallow world. But here's what changes everything. The moment you commit to authentic creation, the moment you stop carrying your depth and start expressing it, the weight doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes fuel. It becomes power. It becomes the exact intensity you need to create something that couldn't exist without your specific vision and suffering. Nietzsche discovered that profound people don't get tired of life. They get tired of unexpressed life, of potential that remains potential, of depths that are never sounded, of visions that are never manifested. You have a choice to make, and you have to make it right now, today. You can continue carrying your profundity as a burden, collecting your exhaustion as evidence that the world isn't built for people like you, waiting for circumstances to change or energy to return or recognition to arrive. Or you can begin today with whatever energy you have to create something from your depth. It doesn't have to be great. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be good. It just has to be yours. It's the authentic expression of what you actually see and feel and understand. The exhaustion you're experiencing is your depths demanding to be expressed. It's creative potential that has fermented too long without an outlet. It's the accumulated weight of 1,000 profound moments that were observed but never translated into something real in the world. And every day you wait. Every day you tell yourself you're too tired, too sensitive, too overwhelmed, that weight increases. But the day you begin creating, even in the smallest way, the transformation starts. Stop for a second and feel if this resonates with you. Have you been carrying profound exhaustion, that unique fatigue that comes from seeing and feeling and understanding at depths others don't? If you identify with this comment, I'm ready to create from my depths. Your words will reach someone else who's been carrying this same weight in silence, believing they're alone in their exhaustion. By sharing this, you help someone who desperately needs to know that profound fatigue isn't weakness. It's unexpressed power. Subscribe to the channel for insights that don't offer easy comfort, but real transformation. Every week I bring you Nietzsche's most demanding truths translated for your actual life, for the specific challenges of being a profound person in a world designed for shallow contentment. This isn't content for casual viewing. This is fuel for people who are ready to stop carrying their depths and start creating from them. If you're ready to understand more about converting exhaustion into creative power, check out my video on Nietzsche's concept of the will to power, where I reveal exactly how to identify your authentic creative drive beneath layers of exhaustion and conditioning. The path from profound fatigue to profound creation starts with understanding what you're actually here to make. Your exhaustion is information. Your depth is potential. Your creative work is waiting. The only question is whether you'll remain a profound person who's tired of life or become a profound person who transforms their tiredness into something only you could create. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.